Not the usual time for New America Foundation programs, but I was thrilled that Ruprecht Polenz agreed to come join us during a very, very busy engagement during his trip here in Washington. I'm Steve Clemens. I direct the foreign policy programs here at the New America Foundation, and I want to offer just a few words about our friend Ruprecht Polenz. I began watching Ruprecht Polenz far earlier than he began knowing who I was, but we've had encounters. In fact, I was reminding him we had a meeting here several years ago in this very room with some visiting CDU parliamentarians from the German Bundestag, and we had private off-the-record discussions about Iran at that time. And I think the discussions were significant enough that at least he told someone, or maybe it was my friend Norbert Wagner of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, who shared some people, because I've been brought in to talk to many other German parliamentarians and others on Iran issues since that discussion, and had written quite a bit. And while I didn't quote him, that was our deal, I did borrow a lot of Ruprecht Polenz's ideas in my own writing on Iran, which I was lucky to do, though I had many people yelling at me at the time about a piece that I wrote called Why Bush Won't Bomb Iran in September of this year. It looked smart now, but at the time lots of folks were screaming, and I was just lucky because I'd spent some time with Ruprecht Polenz. He is, of course, Ruprecht Polenz is chairman of the German Bundestag's Committee on Foreign Affairs. In my views, after having known him for some time, he's sort of a hybrid between Joe Biden and Dick Lugar. More Dick Lugar politically, but tactically and whatnot, perhaps, and in terms of drilling down into the details, more Joe Biden-like. Of course, he's a member of the Christian Democratic Union. He's a member of the Bundestag's Committee on Cultural and Media Affairs. But his real portfolio is focusing on foreign and security policy, and particularly focusing on Iran and Turkey, two vital nations in the German sphere and European sphere. So without further ado, let me invite Ruprecht Polenz to share some few comments, and then we should have a bit of time for exchange with all of you. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for your kind introduction, and thank you for coming to this Q&A meeting, I would call it. I was amongst those who were surprised about the NIE assessment of the American intelligence agencies. And you know the main messages running around the world. Iran has stopped its nuclear weapons program until 2009, but unlikely, but likely between 2010 and 2015 they might have enough uranium enriched for building the bomb and plutonium not before 2015. And the message was perceived as, especially after the speeches of President Bush framing the danger of a third world war on the wall, as Ahmadinejad put it, a victory for the Iranians. I think this is only half of the truth. First, the report says, yes, there was a nuclear weapons program till 2003, and there is an assessment that this special war weapons program has stopped and not be in work since till midst of 2007. But everybody who is a bit more familiar with the dual-use technology, which the nuclear field is, knows that even a civil program, which is aimed at coping with a complete fuel cycle, is also partly possible to be used as a weapons program if you decide so. So I would first say that the UN Security Council has to keep its sanctions of the second resolution at the least. If there is an increase of sanctions, which I think it's a bit unlikely at the moment, it might be better. But as far as I can see the Russians and the Chinese voices, the reluctance we have seen before this report might even increase. But what has to be achieved is another unanimous decision. that the Iranians have to comply, which was the United Nations Security Council requested from them, which means they have to fully cooperate with the EIO, and they have to suspend enrichment, at least for a while. And I proposed that this is a personal opinion, not the opinion of my government, that we could now think about starting negotiations without the precondition that the Iranians first have to suspend their enrichment activities before we can negotiate with them. Because in the past, we had the feeling they suspended the enrichment activities between 2003 and 2005. And they started in 2005. And then we had the feeling if we are negotiating like business as usual, they will buy time, have a nuclear weapons program, and therefore this cannot happen, and therefore the negotiations were finished. And the report gives us at least a possibility to think over if this position is the right one. And if we could decide, we put this condition aside, but of course we have the goal in the negotiations to get objective guarantees from the Iranians that what is now the assessment of the American security services, that there is no nuclear weapons program at the moment, will last forever. And therefore we need objective guarantees from the Iranians. And of course there is one technical guarantee, this is stopping enrichment. The Iranians always have offered different ones according to the NPT, the additional protocol, joint ventures, and so on and so on. And maybe we should discuss different possibilities again. And if the Security Council would give the whole negotiations, let's say for half a year, back to the EIO, then the Iranians had offered immediately to act according to the additional protocol, which gives us a better insight what they are really doing. If you look to the Baradei report, you see that even Baradei is complaining that he knows less and less about what the Iranians are really doing right now. And the additional protocol would give him more possibilities to have a better insight what's going on inside Iran. And we could also press them to ratify the additional protocol. And one second remark I would like to make. We have elections in Iran in March. And if there is an offer at the table, negotiations without preconditions, it would have an impact in one way or the other, let's put it this way first, on the inner Iranian debate. Should we negotiate, should we not? What would we like to achieve, or so? And therefore, it's my personal opinion, it's not the opinion of my government. I think it is worth trying it, because I'm following the Iranian media, and there is a huge debate going on if the policy pursued by Ahmadinejad is really a success story for the Iranians or not. Third point, I see a connection between the Annapolis process and how we are dealing with the nuclear issue of Iran right now. The Annapolis process is crucial to the whole region. And I think we should do what we can to secure the Annapolis process from spoiling influences from the outside. It is difficult enough from the inside, but if it is spoiled from the outside, it might be impossible to become a success story. And I think there are some arguments in favor that negotiating Iran is not feeling himself in a corner out of which he has to spoil via Hamas and Hezbollah what's going on between Israelis and Palestinians. I think it's at least a thought worth thinking over it. And I had a very good example how to deal with Iran given by King Abdullah II of Jordan, when I visited him just 3 weeks ago. He said Iran is like an octopus with tentacles everywhere in every conflict in the region. But we should not go after the octopus, we should go after tentacles. And if we are able to bring forward a solution between Israelis and Palestinians, this will make it easier to settle a deal between Israel and Syria. And if the Syrians are separated a little bit from the Iranians, dealing with Israel with regard to the Golan Heights and so on, then it is easier to stabilize Lebanon. And then the tentacles, Hezbollah and Hamas, are not as dangerous as they are now. So I think this idea, diminishing Iranian influence via going after the conflicts in the region, instead after going directly after Tehran, has also some merits. So the conclusion I would make from all of this is, if we could engage Iran in negotiations, first probably via the EU3 with the consent of the Americans, the Russians and the Chinese, and finally surely also if we can achieve that the Americans are going maybe via the talks about Iraq in more in-depth talks with the Iranians directly, this would be a strategy which might work. I'm not sure if this strategy might work, but I'm really sure that the strategy so far has not worked so very well. So I think it's now a chance to start from a different angle with the same goals. We have the same task. We want to have a Iran without nuclear weapons. We want to have an Iran behaving more constructively in the region, and so on and so on. But the question is how we can achieve this. And finally, and this is my last remark, I guess we need a process like we have seen it in Europe with the OSCE process, also for the Middle East. And this is my last remark. I'm very much doubtful about those strategies. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is a very short-sighted strategy to cope with those challenges, especially in a region like the Middle East. And I also would not like to play Sunnis against Shiites. It's also a very dangerous game, and we are not very experienced in doing this. And therefore, finally, we need also to ease the tensions between Shiites and Sunnis instead of increasing them. So maybe this is enough food for questions and answers, at least for questions, I guess. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chairman Polenz. I want to open the floor, but let me pose one question on the front end, maybe with two parts. In September or October 2003, the Europeans initiated what I saw as one of the first major strategic initiatives of Europe, strategic foreign policy initiative of Europe, without real clear American support. Now, the Bush administration seems to be revising a history that, in fact, it was supportive, but it very clearly was not supportive. I remember stories of John Bolton actually being the person to communicate the change in position to the Europeans, and reading a one-line statement that he mumbled and refused to read again. Actually, it was an absurd moment of theater, but it was very grudging support of European support. And it turns out now, in retrospect, that initiative, in part with the IAEA direction on Iran, was pivotal in doing this. So one part of the question is, has this been absorbed in Europe yet, that in fact something that you did and initiated had weight, substance, impact, and what are the ramifications of that? And secondly, if you speed up to today, France, and I don't want to put Germany in an awkward position of commenting on France, but if there was a Tony Blair in Britain of the moment on Iran, it's been President Sarkozy in France. What do you think France now has to do, and its foreign minister has to do to walk back some of the rhetoric that came from France with regard to Iran's nuclear intentions and program?
First, I would say yes, there is a feeling that the approach via negotiations and pressure, we have always this dual-track approach. We are convinced that without pressure, Iran will not move. This is true, but how to calibrate it? This is the key question, and therefore I'm also in favor of keeping the sanctions as they are because they did not oblige. But I, at the moment, don't see a real chance in the Security Council to get additional sanctions. And I think unanimity is key. It's better to have, let's say, a confirmed second resolution unanimously again than a stronger, in quotation mark, a stronger third resolution with abstaining China and Russia also. This has not such an impact on the Iranians. And with regard to additional sanctions from the European side, I would also say, if there is such an approach, and I'm fine with it, but it has to be an approach from the European Union, from 27 European Union member states in a decision made by the European Union. This has an impact. 27 states say, Iran, you have to stop, you have to change your policy, and until you don't do this, we put these or these sanctions upon you. And it's not a question that Germany and Italy or others who have more vivid economic relationship with Tehran move ahead or something like that. This has not such an impact on the Iranians. With regard to the French rhetoric, I saw it very close to the rhetoric of President Bush, and I didn't like it very much because I think in the rhetoric of a responsible politician, you should always get the feeling that they are after a solution and not after a nightmare.
Thank you. Yes, and if you'll identify yourself for the speaker. Yes, right here. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to pursue this bit about negotiating without the suspension. You said on the one hand, if I understood you correctly, that you favored a continuation of the sanctions, and then but you were also you're also open to the idea of beginning negotiations without suspension. Aren't the sanctions tied, in fact, to their failure to suspend? I'm just wondering how we can make that departure.
The sanctions are the question of suspension is not in the resolution as a sign not to speak to the Iranians, not to discuss. We have now seen Solana for months to try to find a way with Larijani to come from pre-negotiating talks to negotiations. And I think this is not, it was not successful. And to be honest, I don't see that the Iranians will ever give up enrichment activities. I don't see it. It is a broad consensus in the Iranian society, and I think the best chance we have to make sure that the program remains peacefully is via tight control and maybe additional measures like joint ventures or something like that. I don't think that we will be able to let the Iranians stop their enrichment activities, because the sanctions which would force them to do it are due to the oil sector and to the gasoline sector. And so far I have not seen any country who is advocating we should do this. And all the other sanctions will not bring them to this point.
In the very back.
Thank you, Jeff Klein. Thank you for coming and speaking with us. I have two questions that are more or less the same. One is, if you could broadly characterize the difference in relations between Germany, for example, and Iran, and the United States and Iran. just to give us that overview.
So just for the audience, to characterize the difference between Germany's relationship with Iran and America's relationship with Iran. And secondly?
And also related to that, in terms of media, does Germany have an active, like America has the VOA, does Germany have an active way, like Deutsche Radio, reaching Iran?
So does Germany broadcast to Iran?
And does Iran broadcast to Germany?
I guess Deutsche Welle has some broadcasts in Farsi, so yes, we do reach Iranian audience. The difference, the German-Iranian relations and the US-Iranian relations, we have common goals. We both want to see Iran stopping supporting international terrorist groups. We both want a change in the Iranian approach to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, that the Iranians agree to a two-state solution, which they have not done so far. We want to see the human rights situation improved in Iran. And finally, we want to solve the non-proliferation issue, especially with regard to nuclear weapons. So this we have in common. The difference is Germany has diplomatic relations. We are talking to them, and the United States have no diplomatic relations. The relationship between Iran and the United States is also a highly emotional one due to what happened after the Islamic Revolution with the American diplomats in Tehran. And if you mention this to the Iranians, they come immediately with Mossadegh. So you know what's going on not only in the brain but also in the heart of the people, and this makes it a bit difficult.
When was the last time you were in Iran?
Last year, and I go in January again.
Barbara Slavin, who has an important new book on Iran herself, but with USA Today when she's not with the U.S. Institute of Peace. So,
okay.
Barbara.
Thank you very much. You talked about the internal political dynamics in Iran, and it seemed up until this NIE that the dynamics were turning against Ahmadinejad and turning against his neoconservative forces. Now, with the new NIE, he's claiming that it's a victory. You also talk about suggesting that dropping the precondition for talks, not having additional sanctions, won't this help him and hurt the more pragmatic conservatives and the reformers that the West would like to boost in these upcoming elections in Iran?
I think the difficulty is, in fact, to have the right mixture of pressure and incentives. And if the pressure is too much increased, it is an excuse for Ahmadinejad, first for his economic failure. He says it's now due to the sanctions and not due to his own bad politics. And on the other hand, if the Iranians feel under strong pressure from the outside, it's easier for a government which controls all electronic media to say we have to rally around the government until this pressure is overcome, and afterwards we can discuss. But now we have to stay with the government. So I really think to ease at the moment the pressure a little bit would not be a bad idea. And even if you don't side with this argument, it is if you come from a different angle, I see it in the United Nations and in the European Union that the readiness for tougher sanctions now due to the NIE has a bit diminished.
Paul Richter with the LA Times. I promise to work around quickly. We'll have quick questions and quick answers and only ask one question if we may.
Okay.
Do you have a sense that the Americans are willing to take a new approach at this time for diplomatic dialogue, considering that the way they look at it, Ahmadinejad and the hardline nuclear negotiator are running the show?
Key question is, do you have an impression that the United States is willing to take a different tack?
They have started. The American position has changed in the last year. I don't know who made the remark about the position of the American government in 2003 to the negotiations. You mentioned it, and this has changed. And the Americans were also willing to put some incentives on the table with regard to WTO and spares for the aircrafts of the Iranians. And they are now talking about issues of mutual interest with regard to Iraq. And you could continue with Afghanistan. It's at least I would suggest America should do it, because the drug problem is in national interest of the Iranians as well as in our national interest. So why is there no cooperation possible in one way or the other? So I think there is a chance, but of course at the moment there is one big danger, and this is always according to your question. The biggest danger in my eyes is that the Iranians are now miscalculating in a double way. They could miscalculate the weakness of the Americans due to Iraq and Afghanistan and so on, and they could also miscalculate their own strength. And this is, of course, always a dangerous situation. So we have, of course, to make sure that we still are negotiating from a strong position. But on the other hand, the Iranians know quite well that they gained the most profit with regard to power out of the Iraq war and out of the victory over the Taliban. It's what they which strengthens them.
Miles Pomper with Arms Control Today.
We met several years ago in Berlin. I'm sure you remember. I want to ask one question following up on that. She a little bit has to say.
Really quick.
At that time, you were going to Urenco to see how they function, looking at the possibility of some kind of enrichment facility with Iran or some kind of agreement. And you sort of mentioned in your remarks. Is there a possibility of establishing some kind of joint venture or some on Iranian soil that would work? The other question is on your incentives and pressure. It seems that right now the problem is there's not enough incentives and there's not enough pressure. It's not that there's so much pressure. Is there some way that there could be agreement between the United States and the EU to increase both the incentives and the pressure so that Iran is forced to make a choice?
I think it is working that the financial institutions are now very reluctant to finance new businesses with Iran, and this is hurting them, and they have to pay more than they would have to pay if there were not such a risk assessment of the economic community. It's not only due to sanctions; it's just a risk assessment from the banks how they finance or don't finance businesses with the Iranians, and you know, we have to take into account that Iran is a huge country in a strategic strong position with regard to its natural resources, and we have to. We are finally to get them into a more cooperative frame in the region. This is the task we have to achieve, and this means that to some extent we have to accept that at the moment this is a regime we don't like, but this is a regime which is in charge. So what I would have always argued is that in the American policy there has to be a prioritization, that the non-proliferation issue is the first and most important priority, and regime change cannot be achieved simultaneously. Because if you want to achieve regime change simultaneously, it is the best incentive for the Iranians to move with the proliferation issue as fast as they can.
I would refer in this specific question, folks, to take a look at Flint Leverett's piece and Hilary Mann Leverett's, my colleague here at New American Foundation's piece in the New York Times today, which goes into, in fact, I have it right there for Herr Polenz, that addresses at least how you get some of the incentives right and also some of the pressure right. But I'm going to go here, there, in the very back. Yes?
Hi, Jonathan Landon with the Collection Newspapers. You talk about the fact that Russia and China are probably not going to support a new round of sanctions. But what about Germany? A lot of U.S. officials are saying that Germany has also gone, quote-unquote, soft on a third round of sanctions. And secondly, does the German intelligence assessment, as far as you can talk about it, how does that measure up to the new NIE?
First, with regard to additional sanctions, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, has made clear that if we see a new UN Security Council resolution, you know Germany at the moment is not member of the Security Council, we will support that the Europeans decide about additional, very well targeted sanctions. And this position has been is not changed after the release of the NIE.
So if the European members of the Security Council decide in favor of sanctions, Germany will support that?
Yes, sure.
Can I piggyback on Jonathan's question? Does Angela Merkel support your proposal, your personal proposal, that sanctions be maintained but the negotiations be begun with Iran before suspension?
No, I have made it clear. It's my private opinion as a parliamentarian. It's not an official government position.
Thanks. I just wanted to.
The official governmental position is, as you know, we want the Iranians suspending first and then coming to.
And on Jonathan's questions about Germany's intelligence assessment of Iran, is there a gap with the American view, or are they consistent? Is that fair?
As far as I know, there is no gap.
Interesting. Yes.
Bill Jones, Executive Intelligence Review. President Ahmadinejad was invited to the GCC summit by the GCC countries, in spite of the fact that they're under a certain amount of pressure to try and get into an anti-Iran coalition, pressure from the U.S. side, indicating also that they want to try and play a role to bring down some of the tensions in the region. And wouldn't it be possible to try and use that kind of a grouping of countries, regional nations, with involvement from Europe, from Russia, from the U.S., to try and engage Iran in a multilateral format to discuss issues, maybe not the nuclear issue, which has its own track, but to discuss other issues which would create a different atmosphere for them.
So, question for the camera: just is there a multilateral possibility of approaching Iran rather than a bilateral?
I will put my answer from a different angle. I'm following as close as I can, because I'm not a Farsi speaker, Iranian media. They are translated, and I can follow them on a daily basis. And what you can see there is that every invitation for Ahmadinejad, be the conference as small as you can think about, is being celebrated, because they are really upset being isolated. So this is a certain leverage in my eyes, and we can make use of it. The Iranians don't want to be isolated, and if we use this in an intelligent way, at least we can try to bring them into a process where their legitimate interests are put on the table and can be dealt with, and they have legitimate interests. And on the other hand, they are confronted with the concerns and also legitimate interests of their regional neighbors. And then they will hear what they probably know, but they will be confronted with voices, let's say, from Jordan, from the Emirates and elsewhere, who are afraid of the hegemonic aspirations of the Iranians. And then you have a discussion which is needed, because the Iranians like to frame the whole conflict as a conflict between Tehran and Washington. And it has become more and more a conflict between Tehran and states in the region. And as long as we are dealing with the Iranians as it is only a conflict between Tehran and us, we are in a weaker position than if we are able to make visible that the Iranians have also conflicts in the region with their neighboring countries. And we have to think about such an approach to work on structures which will not only help to facilitate the Annapolis process, but also ease the tensions in the region, because it's still a very, very explosive area of the world, and the most imminent danger right now is that the uncertainties about the Iranian nuclear program may have just started a nuclear arms race in the region. We don't know. And even therefore, it is, in my eyes, key that as soon as possible, the Iranians act according to the additional protocol, because this at least would give the Saudis and others more security that in the moment the Iranians are not working on a nuclear weapons program. And therefore it is an issue we have to achieve as soon as possible. And I don't see that we achieve this if we are continuing non-negotiating instead of going back to the EIO, getting the additional protocol, and then moving forward from this on. I think the present situation is so dangerous because you read in the Baradei report and in the NIE, we know less and less about what they are really doing. And this we have to change.
Steve, just a point of clarification,
Yes.
and that is, are you suggesting that the next Security Council resolution confirm the previous resolution?
At least,
but
yes.
Send the issue back to the IAEA?
This would be,
this
what I would like to see, yes.
The chairman has to leave at 11:20, so let me take these last two that I pointed out. You're okay in the very back.
Good morning, Mr. Polenz. I'm
I see.
My question is concerning the reports from Germany about the release of the two Iranians, actually given the Turkish opponents. Some people are speculating this has something to do with the German hostages in Iraq, but people in Lebanon are speculating it might have something to do with the mediation between Hezbollah and Israel on the release of the prisoners in Israel and the Israeli prisoners in Lebanon. But you know what situation is that.
So for the camera, the question deals with Lebanon, the release of some hostages, and Germany's role, if any, or view. And I'm sorry, the acoustics of this room are pretty horrible.
I'm not so familiar with this issue. I know that Germany tries to be helpful in getting solutions in those hostage crises. We have been successful in the past, and this is a reason why there are some engagements of my government to be helpful again, but I'm not familiar with the details.
Let me just finish with one question, because you talked at length about the Annapolis process, and institutionally and also in our program, we completely agree. We helped initiate a letter signed by Brent Scowcroft, Nancy Casagon-Baker, Zbig Brzezinski, people on the right and the left. Sorry if I was told 11:25.
No, 11:20, of course.
So the real question is, what do you think Germany, looking back at this interesting sidestep made by Europe in September and October of 2003 in Iran, are there things that Germany and Europe can do independent of the United States with the Israel-Palestine situation that you're not doing now?
I have been in the region 3 weeks ago, and I was told by Fayyad and Abbas and others, please help us to create jobs in the West Bank. And as soon as there is this sign of hope, it will help us, Fayyad, Abbas, to bring the Palestinians closer behind our government, and then we can move forward. Because this is also a big danger in the Palestine, even in the West Bank, that the Palestinians get more and more fragmented, and the authority of the PA is diminishing, even in the West Bank. And this is because the main reason why Annapolis is so crucial. It cannot fail, because if Annapolis fails, we may see in the next 3 years no new initiative because of the change in the American administration and so on and so on. And the window for a two-state solution might also getting closer and closer because of the diminishing ability of the Palestinians to organize themselves as a viable state in the future. And what this means to the Israeli side, everybody here in the room, I guess, knows. And therefore, if we want a two-state solution, and we do want it, it's now hopefully not, but some frame it as a last chance. And therefore, we also have to look at the Iranians in a way that we are not only focusing on the nuclear issue, but also on protecting Annapolis. Let's put it this way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank our president.